Welcome to the PodoTron Network.
You know, it doesn't matter what walk of life you come from, your race, religion, whatever. Chances are that the legacy of HBCUs and their graduates affect more than one aspect of your everyday life. HBCU ubiquity.
Yeah. Welcome aboard.
Welcome to the new HBCU Ubiquity Podcast, Season 3. I'm your host, Thomas Joyner Jr. So, as with the second half of the last season, we're still in the quote-unquote COVID edition of this podcast. And when it comes to our historically black colleges and universities, most have by now decided to remain closed for the fall semester. And that list includes Hampton, Spelman, Clark, Texas College, Tuskegee, and numerous others. But there are a few like Howard, HU, Tougaloo, and Tennessee State that are attempting a blend of online and hybrid in-person classes. And then others, like Paul Quinn College, have already committed to a tuition discount for the fall. So, question, how has the coronavirus pandemic affected the business that you work for and or own? COVID has changed the economy, and for every success story during this time, like Amazon and Netflix, there are hundreds of thousands of movie theater chains, stores, restaurants, and countless small businesses that are falling by the wayside. But some are thriving. In this episode, we'll talk with Ms. Hope Wiseman, owner and operator of Mary & Main Dispensary in Capitol Heights, Maryland. Hope graduated from Spelman College in 2014 and has since become the youngest dispensary owner in America. We'll talk with her about the ins and outs of starting a business in a new industry, along with how she's adjusted business to keep the doors open during COVID. Thanks again for listening today, and let's get started. Welcome to the new HBCU Ubiquity Podcast. Welcome back to the new HBCU Ubiquity Podcast. I'm joined now by the youngest black female dispensary owner in the United States, Ms. Hope Wiseman. Good morning, Hope, and how's everything in the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area today?
Hello. Everything is going well out here. You know, we are, it's sunny and it's been really, really great here, you know, for the cannabis industry. COVID has been a little bit of a boost, actually. So
really?
Things are great on the business front. Everything is great, you know, emotionally and health-wise. I think a lot of people are, you know, we're experiencing the same things really around the world right now, which is one of the first times I've ever seen that in my lifetime, that everyone, no matter where you are, is experiencing the same thing. But as far as business for me, it's been great.
Yeah, this is one of the craziest experiences in the history of the world that the whole world is experiencing. But I'm glad you touched on that because I want to get into all of that in this conversation. So I guess to start off, you're not the first HBCU student to graduate and go into entrepreneurship, but you are one of, if not the first, to go into the cannabis industry. So of all the pathways ahead of you, what made you choose cannabis in Capitol Heights, Maryland?
Yeah, so for me, the cannabis industry was a really great way to break into a brand new industry that is fast growing and was going to reach multi-billion-dollar status within a few years and eventually become, you know, a powerhouse industry in our economy. And as I saw the trends, I really got interested in cannabis as a business in 2014, the year I graduated. And that's around the time that you started to see cannabis become a little bit more mainstream, and you started to see people like Dr. Gupta talking about it and talking about the positive medicinal effects of CBD and THC alike. And that's when you started to see a lot of states adopting legislation that would legalize cannabis. So, for me in 2014, I just wanted to figure out how the industry worked. And the first thing I realized, it is still federally illegal. However, states were legalizing on their own, but they were only pretty much because it is still a Schedule I controlled substance. You cannot interact with the plant outside of state lines, and there's no interstate commerce. Because of that, I began to look at the time I was still living in Georgia. I attended Spelman College. I was still living there. So I looked at the laws in Georgia and I realized they were a long ways away from, being able to create a viable business. And then I went and I looked at the next state that I knew I had resources and connections in, which was my home state of Maryland. And actually in 2014 was when they passed the bill that created the legislation that now governs the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission.
And I understand this is a family business?
It is. My mother is my business partner. Our third founder he's not related to us. However, my mother is a general dentist and he's an oral surgeon, and they practice next door to each other for 30 years. So someone that I've known forever. My store manager is my mother's best friend who was in the room with us when we began writing our very first application. So yeah, it's very much so a family and close friends business.
So I want to talk about the startup process. With this, like you said, being a new industry, what was that startup process like?
A lot of research. I mean, it was mainly a year of going to any event that we could that had to do with cannabis, talking to anyone that would speak to us, traveling to Colorado, to Nevada, to California, to Oregon, and connecting with people that had licenses already and learning from them. That was 2014 for me. 2015, at that point, we had got a little bit of a hold on the industry and what it would really take. However, knowing that, every state is very different, and this was the first round of licensees for Maryland. So this was going to be a different beast in itself. And we just, like I said, we continued to go to as many networking events and conferences and things like that as we could, and soaked up as much information as we could. We hired a consultant to begin helping us put together our application and our team. And we did that for another year. So 2014 and 2015 were strictly foundation building years.
And how about in terms of things like capital and permits and regulations and even getting a storefront?
So 2014 and 15 were building block years to apply. The application,
wow. Okay.
Yeah, the application process for cannabis is not as simple as, I check these boxes, cool, I get it. It's a competitive process. It's something that you really need to prepare for a year or two in advance. You have to, all the way from capital, real estate, to your operations, to your team. All of these things have to be figured out this is what you put in your application to be picked. So you do all of that work and then you can still not be picked because, like I said, these are very competitive, limited licensing situations. So in Maryland, they were licensing 102 which is what they ended up doing, but they could have licensed up to 107 dispensary licenses, 20 grow licenses, 15 grow licenses. And they said unlimited processing, but they ended up issuing 15 processing licenses. And over, 1,000 people applied for those 15 licenses each. So it's very competitive, and it's not something like this is a very long-term situation unless you are independently wealthy on your own. So as far as capital for us, we bootstrapped the entire process. We probably spent about $250,000 pre-application, pre-award.
Wow.
And that's all at-risk capital that we could have not gotten back. So it's because after we won, then it was another actually almost 2-year process before we opened our doors. So we did not open our doors until September of 2018. And that's when we had to go through kind of like the local zoning situations. We had been awarded our license from the state for a specific area, which was Capitol Heights. Then from there, we had to go through the Prince George's County zoning. So zoning in Maryland is the only jurisdiction that local, what is the word I'm looking for right now?
Input? Jurisdiction?
No, jurisdiction. Yeah, local. That's not the word I'm looking for, but that gets the point across. Like that has
or control, local control of your business.
Local control, yeah. Towns that are incorporated and all that stuff really have no control. Only counties from zoning.
Interesting.
Where in other states it's different. Like in Michigan or Massachusetts, you have to get a letter from the city township that you're going in that says that they want you there. So that's how cities are able to block you out. California, the same way. They have cities that say, no, we don't want dispensaries here. And even they have some that say, no, delivery companies can't come here. So every state, like I said, it looks completely different. In Maryland, the cities and the townships have no jurisdiction at all. But what they can do is make zoning hard. So we were actually in a county that zoning was kind of difficult to navigate. But we did. And so it was like a 2-year prep process and then a 2-year startup process.
By the way, are you the only HBCU owner operator in this space?
I'm trying to think about it. I might be.
So you mentioned earlier a couple times about California and Colorado. And I know that in those states, dispensaries seem to be about as many as there are coffee shops.
Right.
So with that said, and even with the 115 you said licenses that are available in Maryland, that's still pretty competitive. I guess my question is kind of two-part. Mm-hmm. How did you set yourself apart from the other competition in the area?
So you're talking about in the application process?
No, in terms of Marion, Maine. How did Marion, Maine rise above the rest?
Yeah, so I'll say that Maryland did a good job of licensing people it was by senatorial district. Okay. And there were only 2 per district. So there's not going to be somebody right next to you. Also, in most of the zoning ordinances around the whole state, you have to be at least 1,000 feet apart. That being said, there are some places that are saturated, even the state of Maryland, like Rockville. You go up and down Rockville Pike, you're going to see multiple dispensaries probably exactly 1,000 feet away from each other. Where in Prince George's County, because of the zoning requirements, there are not that many. A lot of the dispensaries that were not able to open in Maryland are in Prince George's County. They're also in Anne Arundel County. Those are the 2 counties that had kind of difficult zoning to navigate. So with the ability to there's only 2 people per district anyway. So that's the one good thing. And then 2, Prince George's County had very difficult zoning. So there were some people that were not able to open. In fact, the other person in our district has not been able to open. So, we had that up on our competition. On top of that, we're one of the very few truly African-American owned dispensaries in the state. So we get to command that presence, and a lot of people support us because of it. And then lastly, I'd say it's because we put a lot of time and effort into the experience that the customer has at the store and a focus on education. So not only to talk about the more obvious things that we just have working for us and that are on our side that we don't really control, but the part that we do control, I think we do well as well.
So with that said, and something you mentioned earlier, I want to fast forward now to a couple of years later. How has business been during these last couple of months during COVID?
Yeah, so I think COVID has accelerated the cannabis industry, and it's not looking like it's plateauing anytime soon. I think people have developed new habits, being home, as well as having new ailments that they're dealing with, new types of anxiety, and some people even going as far as dealing with depression, and just being home more, I think has just changed the way people live and in turn, their interaction with cannabis. So, I think that it's really great for the industry that now we have kind of a spotlight on us. On top of that, the Black Lives Matter movement has kind of pulled the veil back on some of the injustices that you see in this country. And I think that it makes it very obvious that cannabis is a part of that discussion. You can't ignore the war on drugs and the role that cannabis arrest played in everything. So all of that being said, I think that it will speed up potentially any elections or votes to legalize cannabis in certain states. Like we know it's going to be on the ballot in New Jersey, and I want to say another state that I can't think of right now, for adult use. And then I think a lot of governors, and maybe even at the federal level, we might be looking at it as a way to collect tax revenue to kind of offset some of these expenses that we're incurring during the pandemic. So I definitely think that for the industry, it's great. For my store, we're doing really well during all of this. And we're just focused on how to, right now, like our huge focus is focusing on how to improve the customer experience.
This is Thomas Joyner Jr., and you're listening to the new HBCU Ubiquity. And speaking of that, how has the customer experience changed throughout all this, or better yet, the way you interact with your customers?
Definitely. I mean, we've had to do some of the things that you're seeing in every store, putting up blockers and, markers for 6 feet away from people. Of course, we're sanitizing every 10 minutes. We're doing certain things, but we introduced curbside orders, which were not, compliant in Maryland before this. They put out a mandate allowing for it because of COVID. So that's really been helpful for us. We've also introduced delivery into our store. So these are things, delivery, we're still ramping up, but, curbside service has really been helpful for sure.
Hope, what would you say would be the biggest unforeseen challenge or benefit to Marion, Maine during COVID?
I'd say the biggest unforeseen challenge would just be, dealing with the increase in volume that we've experienced.
Good problem to have.
Great problem to have, So yeah, we're definitely, I'm retraining my staff. Like, they just haven't been used to dealing with the volume that we have now. So just getting them used to that. And expanding on things like marketing and putting more effort into different areas of the business. It's like we're growing up finally, which I'm excited about. But I'd say something that we weren't expecting that happened because of COVID was just honestly more support. We were definitely expecting to see a decrease in revenue, but it's been the complete opposite. So, we're really happy with honestly both of those things, even the hard part of, introducing new systems to our business.
You mentioned earlier about the number of initial licenses for growing distribution that were available earlier.
Yeah.
So if you are having, if COVID has given you a jump in business and revenue, how has that affected the supply chain?
So, we've definitely seen all of the cultivators and processors in the state attempting to or already expanding. So I am anticipating that by, really the fourth quarter of this year, we're going to see a lot more product in the market. And the market can support those numbers. I think there's still more demand past even what we are supplying the market with right now.
Spoken like a true economics major.
Thank you.
And you actually partially answered my next question, but if you can just expand a little bit more, I was wondering, what is your business outlook for the rest of the year, all things considered? Yeah,
so I definitely think we are going to see continued growth in the market in Maryland and every other state. I think we are going to see that continued growth. I think we are going to see a strong adoption of other types of methods of use besides flower, like edibles, and maybe even tinctures. But I think definitely edibles. I think this is going to be the year of edibles. And yeah, I mean, I think that we're just going to see just steady numbers rising, which may revitalize the investment and capital community in the industry, because right now that's kind of dried up because all of the large companies that went public, raised all this money, and a lot of them have not operationally lived up to what they should have. So that has kind of really dried up the capital in the industry. And I mean, we were already SOL because we couldn't use bank loans and do all these things that you typically can get funding through. So we were stuck with pretty much, people damn near like loan sharks charging you between 10 and 15% for money. So that's where we are now, back there, with no regular investors interested in the industry at the moment. So I think that the growth of the industry will kind of revitalize the investment community, which we'll see some brands next year really take off because of it.
Hope, can you expand on that for a few seconds? Because I've been reading about you mentioned earlier about the Schedule 1 situation, And I've been reading about the banking situation when it comes to your industry. How are you able to work around that with the volume of business that you're doing right now?
Yeah. So every state, like I said, is very different, but there are, there are like some internet focused tools that help people create bank accounts that are virtual. But I have a bank that I work with here in Maryland. A lot of state chartered banks will work with cannabis companies. You just pay much higher fees. I pay about almost $2,000 a month just to have a checking account.
Wow.
Yeah. And then you pay for, of course, for your money to get picked up. You're paying for, you just being charged fees left and right. So, and it's because, it's not just because the bank is being greedy. Granted, they know they have kind of a monopoly on it. There's going to be very few banks that, one, can, and two, want to deal with the hassle of it. But essentially, when a bank works with a cannabis company, you know how people always say, don't go deposit $10,000 cash because then you're going to be flagged or whatever. So the flag is they have to fill out, or you have to fill out a SAR, a suspicious activity report. And essentially, the banks that work with cannabis companies have to fill out a SAR for everything that we do, every transaction we make. So it is, like the bank that I work with, I know essentially created a whole nother department to work with all the cannabis companies. They pretty much have every cannabis company in the state working with them. So they hired 4 or 5 people to just work on pretty much filling out SARs all day. It's not an easy thing. So it's not like the $2,000 going to nowhere. They have to pay their people.
It sounds like the industry on a state by state level still maturing and has a long way to go.
Definitely. Yeah, it has a long way to go. Granted, this could all be changed by, just a new federal law that says this is not a Schedule I drug anymore. Right. And, that it can all change. So, the people who are in the industry right now, we really are pioneers and we're laying the framework because there's going to become a day that this is very different and much easier and much more like a traditional business. But the industry wouldn't have been what it was without us kind of paving the way.
Hope, in closing, do you have any words of advice for aspiring HBCU students that want to be entrepreneurs and open their own successful business, especially during these times?
Yeah, so I would say to think outside of the box and be innovative. Find a real problem and create a solution. Do not focus on making money. Focus on identifying a problem and really coming up with a solution to that problem. And then from there, focus on building, strategies that make you money. But I wouldn't focus on the money first. I feel like, you see all these coaches and all these things now, and they tell you to do things like, okay, if you want to make $10,000 a month, then you need to do X, Y, and Z. But I feel like that part doesn't come until way later, until you already have proof of concept. And it really makes sense. Sometimes you have to give your stuff away for free, whether they be your services or actual product, just so you can prove your concept. And from there, then go on to planning on how you're going to price your product and how you're going to sell it or your service and how you're going to sell it and market it to reach certain financial goals. But I would say definitely lead with innovation and create a solution to a problem. And if you can't do that, then you don't have anything to sell yet.
I hear you, and very well spoken. And one more real quickly, with the start of the fall semester around the corner in about 2 or 3 weeks, do you have any words of encouragement or advice for incoming and or current Spelman women?
Yeah. So Spelman is an awesome place. It can also be a very daunting and overwhelming place if you allow it to be. I would say always remember your why. If you don't know what your why is, that's okay too, because Spelman will help you figure that out. But utilize the resources that you have at your fingertips. Utilize your counselors, your deans, your professors, your classmates, and really try and build a network that you can lean back on after you graduate. Don't focus so much on being lights and joining the stroll team and all those things are fun. But at the end of the day, when these 4 years are over, what really matters is the network that you've created, as well as, if this is your thing, the job you're able to land. I was super focused on, that career center and making sure that I was going out of Spelman with a good job. And I landed my job offer and accepted it by the end of my junior year. So I went through my whole senior year knowing I had a job waiting for me, starting pretty high up. So I would say that's what I would encourage people to remember and focus on, because it's really easy to get caught up in the minutia of, all the cool stuff that we do at HBCUs, and especially at Spelman and Morehouse. It's really a mecca for a lot of those things. And then Atlanta in general. So just don't get caught up in the life. Enjoy those things, because you only get one time to do it. But, don't let it become your everything and you forget why you're really there.
Well, thank you, Hope Wiseman, owner of Marion, Maine and Capitol Heights, Maryland. And I'll be back with closing thoughts on the new HBCU Ubiquity podcast. Well, we can't tell just yet, but all schools we know will need aid, support, and guidance to start out the 2021 year. And that's yet another reason to ensure that you're registered to vote right now. It won't take but a few minutes of your time to register, and a few more minutes to Google your local, state, and federal candidates to see where they stand on education as a priority and how that stance will apply to HBCUs. If you can't find out through Google, ask them, tweet them, DM them, email. It's election season, so candidates more than likely will respond to you. I'm Thomas Joyner Jr., and thanks again for listening. And I hope to talk to you again on next time on the new HBCU Ubiquity podcast. Take care.
Sign up and be a part of the team. Be a PodoTron at PodoTron.com. Thank you for listening to PodoTron.